we worked together before. I totally remember hiring you when you were like 8 months pregnant, if I am not mistaken.
Yes.
And we had to move the table back for you to sit down at the Cheesecake Factory. So
Yes.
what interested you out of college? What interested you to get into recruiting? What was the first thing that kind of grabbed your attention?
So that's an interesting story too, right? So Elmir actually found the listing for recruiting on Monster, back then. And I had a degree in psychology because I was always fascinated by people, right? So the story of people, how we work, but then also in biology and chemistry. And when I listed that on my resume, I was getting pinged for lab work, right? Research assistants, things like that. And I was like, I'm not interested in that. I really want to be around people. And so when recruiting became a job that I could have, it was really about matching people with jobs. It was seeing that changing, understanding who they are and then matching, like being a matchmaker with a job and a person. And I was like, that's interesting. And I was like, and I get to, it's something new every conversation. So that's really what interested me in it.
So what interested you getting out of it? Because I remember when you quit, so I just kind of, I have this in my history, but I would love to hear your thought
He knows
process.
he knows all the history. So I always say in recruiting life, like 1 year is like 3 years, because you're constantly, it is a high pressure game. Like there's always, I think in my first 2 recruiting roles, it's like you were in the pit, you were in the, like you needed to know and understand what the position was, what the company was. I mean, you had to learn, pick up, and then look in your pipeline, make connections, make calls, right? Send emails, and everything is now and nothing is later, right? So it's that intensity and that fire always going. And then you start to adjust your day, right? Your day is like, okay, if I catch that person before they actually go to work, I have a better chance. So then you start to skirt your time from 7 in the morning till 7 at night, because you're like, I got to catch them after they get off their current roles or their current jobs. And so that grind and that it does wear on you. And so I think that's one aspect, right? Because I was pregnant at the time, and I was like, I can't keep up this intensity and then also make a human. That's how. So one of the big pieces of it too is in the technical recruiting world, which is the job that we connected on. The conversations the intensity wasn't as heavy. You got to have conversations about the role, to know, what made that project manager interested in being a project manager. You got to understand. So that curiosity that fed me, I was like, oh, technology is interesting. Oh, that technical project manager role is kind of thing. Oh, that account management role that I've been searching for a person from. I started to see myself in some of those roles. And I was like, well, why can't I do that? Right? Like I'm, everything I'm looking for, I see that in myself. So why couldn't I pursue that? And so that's where the conversation started. And of course, you and I had the conversation of like, well, my current boss just told me that based on this personality test, I will never be in sales and I will always be a recruiter. I feel like that's not true. Who do you know? Who should I talk to? How do I get out?
Right.
So,
and so when you left there and you left us and you went over to
Beeline.
Doug, over to Beeline, and obviously Doug is a huge mentor of mine, and he's obviously probably a mentor of yours as well. Fantastic leader, right? What did you, when you went in there and you became like a technical project manager, kind of talk to me a little bit about that kind of transition, because that's a career change, right? Like you went from like you said, I recruited for those roles. Now I'm actually those roles, right? So kind of just talk about that transition.
Yeah. And that's that part of the ambition I'm talking about, right? Like being able to see your sight line of, I'm making the leap from recruiting for these roles. So knowing about it, but never actually doing it, right? To then saying, I can do that. I see myself do that. I see the potential in me to do that, and seeing it 1 or 2 steps ahead. That was my ambition once I left. It's like, okay, how do I align that? And that was the Beeline was a company that I made the leap to, and it was a technical company. But there was no way that I could be a technical project manager because I didn't have the experience. I even knew as a recruiter, like, you know what they're looking for, at least 2 years to be even a coordinator. So I had the conversations with Doug. I had the conversation actually with Casey, you know, like, who was my first like female leader role model and also boss. And she was like, look, Eleanor, I'll be honest with you, that technical role is not, you're not ready for that yet. But look at your personality, right? Look at what you can do. Look at your aptitude. You know, the role that we have right now is a senior account manager. So can you manage relationships? Yes. Like, can you be client facing? Yes. Right. Are you organized, and do you have the leadership qualities that it takes to like lead a team, right? As we build a team. Yes. Okay. Let's shoot for that role. And that conversation opened up the door to like help me understand and humble myself, right? To say, okay, how do I take the next 2 steps? But let's be like honest about what I can do today. And so that really helped me understand, okay, these are strengths. These aren't things that I just take for granted, right? That like, I'm just a pleasant human being. Like, oh, that actually translates to skills and abilities, right? Like, a smile isn't just about being endearing. It's about, okay, you have professionalism. You're actually approachable. You can deliver bad news and feedback, and you can get work done based on your ability to connect with people quickly. Like, that's what a smile translates to, right? So, so that helped to then connect the dots and then transition to, you know, because of that experience. At first I thought like, oh, it's not exactly a technical role. It's an account management role. It's a relationship management role. But I took that as an opportunity to say, like, how technical can I get? Even I'm a relationship manager, even though I'm the one that's like communicating mainly with the client, how I can ask those questions why. So there's technical problems. Okay, I'm dealing with errors. Okay, let me work with the development team to understand what are the problems. How do we fix it, right? What are the next steps? How do we start to create plans? And so how do I take everything that I want to do and bring it up to the experience and the role that I have today, and start basically playing the role and bring it in and add value on both ends, right? My development, and then the client feels better because I'm communicating technical details in a very business human way. And it ended up making the transition much smoother.
So how did you kind of talk a little bit about the tech piece of it, right? So, and if anyone's on this call or listening when this on the recording, as a project manager, what advice would you give to any PMs on how to interface with dev teams, design teams, when you don't know, right? You're not in that day to day. How do you get them to listen to you and to be able to kind of respond to you in a positive manner? Because I've always heard that project managers always struggle with that, right? Yeah. How do I get, like, you know, a tech team to buy into what I need to get done for the business? What advice would you give for that?
I think number one is creating rapport and having conversations, like get to know them as people. I think one of the biggest things that you know, project management, you know, they're thought of as like having the clipboard, right? Like before, and it's just like, it's project plans and spreadsheets and you know, and a checklist. And really, when developers and designers are working on, you know, and they're in the zone and they're working on their projects and they're working on their specific tasks, and they get interrupted, right? It's very obtrusive. And so already you started off on a like ill footing, right? Like you've interrupted their zone, like, you know, and then you're asking for, you know, updates on something that if it's already available somewhere else, right? They're already like, oh, why are you doing this, right? So I think there's two things, like very simple, is one, treat them like humans, right? like have a conversation, build the rapport, be resourceful. So if that information exists anywhere, hunt for it, look for it. And because a lot of times those updates exist somewhere, and you just need to go out there, and the project manager in us needs to be resourceful and find that information, because they should be focused in, them being the team should be focused on the activities. Two is really educate yourself on what that looks like, and be the spokesperson for the client side so that they can understand and empathize with the need, right? So the more connected developers and designers, they want to solve a problem. The more connected they are to the problem and not just the activity, the more they're bought in with you to help solve it with you. So, oh, there's a roadblock in this. Oh, and then it becomes more of a communication, and it becomes a journey that you have to map together, versus I'm responsible for this, you're responsible for that. When is this task going to be done? And it becomes this kind of dehumanized task list versus, hey, we've landed this client. These are the problems we're trying to solve. Here's how we're going to do that together. And anytime you run into an issue or problem, raise that up to me, because it's going to impact everything. And then if anything changes on the client side, I commit to you to be that voice, and I'll protect you, right? So like during my project management days, I was known as like mama bear, right? Because I was protective of my team. I was like, don't disrupt them for nonsense. Let them focus on the problems that they're trying to solve. But at the same time, I was like, look, you said you're going to do this. I was still also protective of the client. But
what's the most challenging project that you were on? And what would you say, like, how did you overcome it? Like, how did you meet the business demands when maybe the business demands just seem to be so far out of reach? Right?
as a project manager, let's see. I think, wow, that's a good question, actually.
I've got 73 other ones, so I've got some time. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I think, I think, going through the Beeline time and then also Ignite, right? When we were looking to build our own platforms and our own software, I think there's, definitely creating products from scratch, right? Creating problems with, just say you are the project manager. And so at times you're working with teams that you didn't necessarily put together. They were either preformed or, and so there's a product manager that has a vision, right? That sees it a certain and a specific way. And you're going to have leaders like that. And you have to keep that mindset, they are passionate about their product that they're building. They see the problem in a certain light. You're going to work with developers and that have challenges and maybe have difficulty communicating how they feel or the questions that are surfaced. And I think those are the problems that you're going to face as a project manager. It's not necessarily the technical capabilities. Like, can we do this? Technically, the answer is always yes. They will always, if you have good designers and developers, technically anything is possible. And that's even true more so today than it has ever been in the history of the more recent and modern tech. We can develop things faster for cheaper. So technically, that's not the challenge. The challenge is communicating between, hey, here's how we see the problem, and how the product teams typically communicate with their engineers, and the passion play between direction and how they communicate, no, I don't want to do that, or no, this is the way, or are we collaborating, or is this a fiefdom, right? Is it a collaborative team or not? And so that's where I've often seen the challenges. It's been more with team dynamic, ownership and accountability of the task at hand, so to speak, and then being able to communicate issues, raise up concerns, and share bad and good feedback. I think that's a huge challenge too. It's they let things slide, and then a 6-week development cycle turns into 12 because communication was poor.
Right.
So
when you were the head of digital for Adecco, right? And I'm always kind of curious, and I've never really asked you this question. I've always wanted to, because as a head of digital for North America, you were probably pitched so many ideas, right? From so many different startups and entrepreneurs. And anyone that's on this call as an entrepreneur, what was the best pitch that you ever heard? And what advice would you give to future entrepreneurs on validating their ideas, right? Because you heard so much of it. What was the best one that just kind of blew you away? And why, right?
Yeah.
What was so good about it?
The best one was,
other than Path to, of course, but
yeah.
Let's move on. No, I'm just kidding. Just totally
Path to, actually it was, let's see, it was a company called Galvanize, and it was Ryan, and he's still one of my really good friends. So I'll probably send this to him so he can see it. But no, it was a competitor for General Assembly, and we ultimately went with General Assembly. But the pitch and the motivation, and that's for me, what was so good about that was the model. And it was a very different model. So those that don't know or are familiar with Galvanize, at the time it was basically like a coding camp, but specifically for data analysis and engineering. And so it was focused on school for data scientists, right? And so, but it was a mixture of online and in-person learning, with cohorts that were solving real world problems brought to them by corporations. So the cohorts, so they would learn, they would process, and then the problems would come in, and then they would be sponsored, and then that would lead to internships, apprenticeships, and future work, right? So the connection between the corporate or the communities with real world analytical problems would then be solved by the students that are part of the cohorts, right, in the class. And so what was so dynamic about that was I had been pitched schools like, quite often, especially, for acquisition and for, just to be a client. And what was so different about this was we were on site, and basically it was just the passion and enthusiasm from the first moment. Like, he leaped out of the elevator, and it was like this, I have to pay attention, right? This is not something I could just walk through. And then we did a tour of the facility, which was focused on culture. And then it was, let's sit on the couch and just have, like, it's not about pitching on a huge giant screen. It was about having a conversation. And he asked, like, what mattered to us? What mattered to Adecco? What were we missing? What were we solving for? How do we want to impact the community? So things that, I was ready because that's my passion, right? I knew Adecco. I still know Adecco. And he was asking me questions versus pitching at me. And that was the difference, because then the next 30 minutes was all about how does that fit in, right? How do they fit in? And so it became this, the conversation still hasn't ended. So every single, like, endeavor that he comes up, or it's more the style, right? So it was the content, it was the fact that he was also honest about areas where it wouldn't fit in, right? These are still gaps, we can't solve for it today, but let's work on this together. And I still adopt that. I think that that's an important part of the pitch. So why was it important, right? Or why was it different? It was because, first of all, just the enthusiasm and the passion, you can tell that he was connected to the cause. The second was that it was a dynamic conversation. It was understanding who I am, what my company represented, what I cared about, what were the problems I was solving. And then the close was, how does their product and their passion and their company and their culture, how does that fit in, and how can they solve it for us? But then also being honest again and truthful about where it wouldn't be a good fit, the risks are, right? And that honest, like, okay, I want to keep the conversation going. So, I mean, while we didn't ultimately invest, it ended up yielding like much more as far as connections, as far as next steps, and as far as, certain things for me personally. Right. So
Right.
I can also equally tell you what was the worst.
Please. That was my next question. So
Yeah.
figured that you
So
would lead down that path.
yeah, the worst, I would say, I mean, it's still one of my favorite kind of funny moments. Because in San Francisco, we were specifically positioned to be able to, essentially have an open door. If we were able to connect with you and you were, in the financial district or, 5 blocks within, like we could meet up, have a coffee, or we could be at WeWork, right? So there was a time where blockchain was everything. The minute blockchain hit, and there's just like, okay, everyone is into blockchain. So Eleanor, like, you're in the center of where blockchain is happening, and literally was in the center. There were, once we said, okay, let's focus in on that, there were 29 companies that popped up within 3 blocks of our WeWork on California, right? And in San Francisco, in specifically. Yeah, so I was like, okay, like we should be able to just connect with them, just understand who they are, what are they doing, how are they different. So we were able to set up probably 10 to 15 conversations with the companies. And so one of the companies came in and was late, number one. So that's always great. So,
Always
and
a good
always
sign.
a good thing. And I also had, because it was such a high priority for the group, I had the global head of AGX there, and very Swiss, right? I mean, so we're there, we're sitting in the conference room, we're late, like he's late, he comes up and then he doesn't introduce himself. So no introductions, just sits down, pops up his laptop, or actually his, the iPad, pops it up, and then asks me for a coffee, which is always great. So
Wow.
like, wow, okay. So then, we go through this, and at that point, like it was going to be an excuse, but I'm like, look, everyone has a story. Like, I'm open to the next 15 minutes. Let's have the story. Let's see how it goes. Because, maybe culturally, there are differences. Yeah. So then the conversation continues. Pitch starts right away, right? So we make the introductions, we explain what we're looking for. He's not paying attention. He's focused in on that. So we're like, okay, like this is like going down and down. But again, we committed, we spoke and we committed to 15 minutes, right? And then we were going to make the call. In the conversation, it was beautifully marketed pitch deck. It was exactly like how, if you look up how to pitch a startup,
Right. That was
it
it.
was exactly
Check
it.
all
It was
the
like
boxes.
perfect
Right.
7 things. When we asked the question of why do you care, and he was just like, I'm here to make money. Okay. What's your connection to blockchain? It's the latest thing, and I know how to build it. What makes you different? I built it. And I was like, who vetted this guy? And so it was just that the overall piece of it was just, completely opposite to the conversation prior, which is, there was no research, there was no connection, there was no, I mean, it was just, it was, there was no rapport built. There was no, I mean, it was just, aside from the etiquette and, and yes, there might have been culture and company culture and country differences, and potentially language barriers in a way. It was just not knowing, where your passion lies, and not having a connection to that, I think for us was the biggest turnoff. Like everything else could have been dismissed, right? But there was no, technically it wasn't, there wasn't a solution that could even be, found. Like I couldn't come to you and say like where it was even built or how it was going to be successful. And I can turn anything around. But that one was just, there was no why, right? And there was no how.
Right.
So
yeah. No how, no what. just no why.
Yeah. Even if there's a why, like,
And the
hey,
why
yeah.
was, it sounds like the why was just to make money,
Yes.
right? Which is
Yes.
just
The latest,
not
hottest thing.
not a solid why, in my opinion.
Mm-mm.
Okay. So years, you were with Adecco, the family of companies, for what feels like forever, right?
Yeah.
Like, other than Matt Petrovich, you actually take the cake for working with that organization as long as you
I
did.
think so.
Yeah, you have
Yeah.
10 plus years, right?
Yeah.
So
13. Yeah.
yeah, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So to think about that, right? So 13 years of your career you spent with one organization, and different businesses within that organization, right? But you were there. When you chose to leave, what was your motivating factor? And again, I have to kind of go back to your history with career changes, right? Like, what scared you the most about kind of walking away from Adecco, and then also going into what you kind of self-prescribed as a startup, right? So you're around startups forever, and you heard all these pitches. What did Paradox do that, like, wow, I'm gonna leave my cake job? No offense to your cake job, but you know what I'm saying, right? You've been there for 13 years. Like, it's just, you're head of digital, like, really, with some major executives within Adecco. Like, you had lines to some really senior people.
Yeah.
What was scary and what was not scary for anyone that's on this call on making a career change, right? So just want to hear that kind of part of your story.
Yeah, I think when you look at my experience and the changes, even though, like, each of those moments, right, those moments of truth with those career changes and shifts, even with the different business units within the Adecco Group family, it was very much a personal decision. I think from the point of getting into the Adecco Group through Modus, right, at the time MPS Group. It was all through connections and network. It was through conversations that made me think, right? Like, because for me, it was, why I stay is because I'm passionate about the purpose, which is making the future work for everyone, right? And it was always grounded in solving that problem of helping people find jobs, which jobs are so important to anyone's identity. I mean, that's why we're here in this industry, right? It shapes your identity, it shapes who you are, it gets you, and it, in some ways, in a lot of ways, defines you. But then on the very pragmatic side of it, it's also how you afford not just your luxuries, but your essentials, right? And it keeps your family safe, it keeps yourself fed. So that, I just think that there's so much purpose there. How we do it, I think that makes the difference. And I think that's where, in every step of the way, those conversations led me to think, okay, what am I looking to learn? What am I looking to challenge myself with? And have I fulfilled my purpose and my mission to help improve, like, the humanity of finding, right, of connecting people to jobs, right? And doing something positive in that way. And so that's why all the different paths within Adecco Group were always appealing to me, because it was something new to learn. It was a new challenge, and it helped fulfill the purpose in a different or more dynamic way, right? And so
would you say that your
yeah,
purpose coming out of college, right? And you mentioned this earlier, your purpose has always felt connecting people with jobs, right?
right,
So you've kind of
yeah,
been in this forever, right? So that is that, and, like, a major in psychology, right? And all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Like,
understanding people and their story, and
right,
what makes them
right.
who they are, and and the fact that people, right, and I think you can tell even in my stories today, right, about why pitches matter to me. It's because of the story behind it. Like, the fact that you can identify someone that has a passion, right, even if they have no experience in work at all, why, if they have a passion in music, in art, to me, that is the connection I have. You are passionate, you can find passion is something that means that you have drive, which means that you will work, right? That means that you will commit to something because you've done it before. So the likelihood that you can do that is twofold versus you have no interests and nothing really drives you except for money. Like that, it's just not going to work. So with Adecco, there's always changes in leadership, and I've gone through multiple changes in leadership, and some have opened doors, and some have just kind of kept the doors, pretty pretty fluid, but didn't make any marked changes, right, to my career. The last shift, I think, really, to be fair, it's like while I was still connected to the leadership, to Zurich, to the headquarters, right? The purpose was starting to be lost. We had already fulfilled our duty, as AGX, to make our investments in key strategic areas. We invested in General Assembly. We invested in Vettery. We had key partnerships with Maya and a few others in the industry globally. So we had already fulfilled our mission in a way that was mission critical, and so now it was about maintenance and operations, right, of those investments. And so I had to think about that, right? Is that fueling my my desire to learn? Is it going to be a challenge for me? Is there anything else that I can do as part of the foundation? Or, how far can I reach? And I did have conversations along the way. But I think there was one, it was a lunch conversation where it's just like, hey, if you're open to this, Eleanor, I have a founder interested in speaking with you just to get an understanding of, who you are. It's just good to network. And I always say yes. I think everyone on the call, always have a conversation. It's not a commitment, right? It's just a conversation. It's getting to know someone and getting to know who they are and what their story is. And you're always going to lead with something to learn, right? And that's the ideal. But when it came to that conversation, I had already come to a point where every year around my anniversary time, I take a look at, what have I accomplished that year? Have I grown? What am I looking for? And do a certain assessment for myself. So it was already kind of interesting time. And what was missing for me at that point, and what I looked at from a gaps perspective, was I wasn't connected to the mission anymore. The whole purpose of finding the new dynamic way of connecting people to jobs, or improving, large populations of people, or whatever it was, anything that connected me to a mission of connecting people to jobs in a new dynamic way, or helping the refugee crisis, or connecting to the footprint that would eventually lead to some sort of legacy, right? Some sort of positive impact. I was starting to see it lose focus within at least my role in the Adecco group. And it was focused on things that were more operational. And so that to me wasn't, that wasn't my path, and that wasn't going to be where I felt it needed to continue. And so when that conversation happened with Aaron and Paradox, it was, who am I, right? So it's the same conversation of who is Eleanor, what's the experience, help me bring to life your experience and why that matters, right? And here's the company of Paradox and what we're trying to build in the, we're a small company that's looking to build, a great dynamic team, and your passion and energy around both technology, around the HR tech space, around people and connection, was really appealing to Aaron, right? And so he was like, I didn't think Adecco Group had these types of people. And I was like, well, yeah, we haven't met yet, right? We haven't met yet. So now Right. And so I was very proud to represent Adecco Group in that way, in San Francisco, for the Americas, in Zurich, wherever I was, because I was very proud of what Adecco stands for, and I still am. But the opportunity to build a company and be a part of an executive team, and and implement things that I was consulting startups on, right? Growth stages. What happens when you get a Series A? How do you understand the culture of your team, and how do you again not generate assholes, right? You don't want people within your company, to be of that nature, but and get work done, right? So being able to say, okay, here I can come in, I understand technology, I understand business. I understand the communication and the importance of it. I understand the future and what's possible. So yes, I can definitely, like, I'm excited and passionate about heading up solutions because I can see it from a visionary perspective, but then tone it down to say, like, we can strategically lay this out and we can deliver. And it's not just some vision on a whiteboard. It's how do we implement this reality and take it step by step? And I'll be with you, right? You and your team who's not tech savvy, but let's solve the problem together and use our technology to be able to do that. I was like, yeah, of course, like, I'm in. So San Francisco to Scottsdale, in a year, within the last year, or
Right.
actually within a couple months. So yeah.
Right. Was there like any moment during that transition that you felt scared, right? Like you like exactly, like I'm sure it was, right? But of those moments, what was like, how did you overcome that fear, right? Do you just,
because it's faith, right? I mean, I think that's fair,
right.
Pete. I think that's a great question. And, you always want to see the happy path. And when you look at anybody's career path, you're just like, here's how I got here, right? But there, of course, I mean, it's 13 years committed to a company, right? And safety and security and tenure, right? Like all the weeks of vacation and also the relationships, and worrying that those would break. I think also the unknown of a startup, right? It's 3 years old at the time. It's leaders that I have never worked with before. I've only got to know them for 3 months. But yeah, of course there was like fear and there was uncertainty and kind of reservation.
Through that fear, right? And like you said, a 3-year startup, right? So for anybody on this call, right, that's made the plunge and go to work for a startup, what was it about their leadership that made you comfortable? Like, I know the mission, right, and the vision and what they're doing, but they must have convinced you that it's beyond just the mission, right? It's leadership, right?
Yeah.
So
it's the person. You ultimately commit to the person, not the company, right?
Very true. Very true.
And so I think exactly to that, where I felt where I could trust was because he was, Aaron is a founder within the industry. So he's been in the industry for 20 years. So he didn't come out of San Francisco. He didn't come out of, a tech background that just built cool tech for an industry that was hot at the time. Right. So as someone that was a recruiter, that was an HR professional, that understood the pains and problems of like the operators of recruiting, and built 2 companies prior that were hit by different parts of the recession, right? 9/11, and then of course the crisis. There are a few other financial crises that also he went through. So he's weathered storms, right? So I think part of it is, number one, he had previous companies within the HR tech industry, and then he weathered storms, so he knows what could come and the way that he was thinking about it. And he surrounded his team, and he continues to surround his team with experts, on areas that he's not an expert in. So like, humble enough to know where it's like, this is my domain, but then here's everyone that I'm bringing in where you can add to and complement and multiply. And I think that was a big thing. But if you want, I mean, honestly, like, if you want a real exercise that I went through, like, do you want that? Like, if you want to know what I did, I mean, honestly, I've made a list. Like, I mean, to be very practical, I made a list. I had conversations with my best friends. It's the very natural thing to do, is where you have a secure network of who's going to tell you the truth, right? Like, Pete's on my list for so many different reasons, but it is about, like,
I remember talking to you.
Yes. I mean, with any life decision, I mean, he's been with me from almost every single, I think every single point of opportunity that I've had, because he's on my list of 5, which is the person that's close to your industry but knows you and will tell you the truth either way, right? someone that is like your family member that doesn't know anything about your business, or family or close friend that knows nothing about what you do, but knows you as a person and can see like the bullshit, right? And will like weed through
Right.
that and just tell you. The other one that's like the friend that's like, that just makes you feel good. So like, there are going to be times where you're like, really, you just need someone to support. Right. And so, and then, you know, and then you have like the true mentor and coaches where it's like, look, you've had this career, you've had, you know, it's someone that you look up to, someone that you just admire, and you aspire to be in that type of role in the future. So like, you want to do a check and balance and say, look, I want to be you when I'm all grown up. And I have a couple of different options to make, you know, and this decision is here, you know, what do you think? And really getting that kind of advice. And then honestly, like the fifth person is truly a coach. It's someone that's coaching you, that's going to tell you, that, and it may be a paid professional, or it may be someone that acts as a coach for you, but it's just like breaks you down, you know, breaks you down, lifts you up, gives you the hard exercises to do, and gets you prepared. And so in this time of like a true pivotal moment, I may not have like truly assembled or talked to all five, but I did reach out to a few and get different perspectives. And then I put down like truly what my visionary like plan was. Who do I want to be? What do I want to accomplish in 3 to 5 years? Like, who is Eleanor in 2000, whatever, 25, right? Or something like that. You know, what is my title? What is, you know, the things that are important? What did I want to learn? What do I want to accomplish? And does this move feed into that? And be objective, because it's not always just a matter of like, because you'll get opportunities, right? This, you know, I had a couple of conversations before this one, where it was like, I can do that, and they're a great team, and they had a great mission, you know, and great opportunity, but it was just like, does it really fit into my plan or my path, or what was missing? And so doing the exercise for yourself personally on creating your list of like who you are, who you want to be, what criteria fits into that, I think is a huge exercise, because every conversation that you have after that, whether it's a casual like networking conversation, you're ready to either decline the opportunity or skirt away from it, or you're ready to dig in and kind of lean in and say, oh, I'm curious, let me hear more, because that's exactly what I was shaping up to do, right? So it's
No,
that way.
that's really good advice. I've never heard that before. Having five people, right? Like whatever, if it's 2 or 5 or 10, that's good, because again, everybody needs that access to certain people to lean in with, right, and get good advice from. But I love your idea that, you know, choose a person that, I mean, again, we all have family members. I still have, my daughters don't even know what I do.
They didn't know what you do. Yeah,
they don't. And even when I work remote, right, which we're all in now, right, we're in this remote world, my daughters always make a joke. It's like, I still don't know what you do. Like, I hear you on the phone, but I don't know really what you do. And even when I try to describe it, it just still is like, they don't care, right? It's just, they're not interested. But that's really good advice, to kind of have that person that knows you, right, and knows you without business, to give you that advice. That's awesome.
mm-hmm.
That's good.
It's real.
We're almost, yeah, it is. It's real. So I don't want to take too much of your time. I know we're getting kind of close. I do want to open it up, but I just kind of want to close, right, with a couple different questions. Okay. So as a mother, as a woman in technology, right, and grown your career, what advice would you give? What's the best advice that you've learned along the way that you can share with all of us?
Oh, that's good. I think there's 2 things, I would say. I mean, there's going to be ultimately more, you know,
Right.
that stems from this. But one of the things that I think is huge to see is that I alluded to it in the beginning, right? Is that every moment in my career where I've had to make a change. Some of it was through a conversation, and it was just the right opportunity, especially the more recent changes and shifts. In the earlier part, like becoming an account manager, right? Or shifting actually from office professional staffing to Modus, like IT staffing, that was due to, I needed to save my life and my time. And I needed to make sure that I had energy enough for a baby. Like it was a shift, it was a shift, but but it was propelled and inspired by the fact that I was going to be a mom. The shift from, going into, technology or, being, or actually staying in certain roles a little bit longer, same thing. It was just, I said no to a few positions while I was at Beeline, number one, because of the culture in the company, but also because I was like, you know what, I need this. I'm ambitious and I love what I'm doing, but and I love being able to kind of make the next two steps in the next 2 years. But at the same time, I was like, I want to have, at the time I was like, I want to have a girl. Like my son is 4. I want to have a girl, and for that. And so yes, some things were inspired by family, and I embraced that, like because I stayed a little bit longer, I got more technical experience. I got those harder projects. I got to develop my story a little bit more. And before I was shy to say it, because it was inspired by the fact that I wanted more kids, right? And nobody wants to identify yourself as a woman because you're a hard-hitting technical project manager. But it's like, no, like that was the real reason. I wanted to be in a secure, friendly environment that was conducive to expanding my family. And at the same time, I was able to expand my career. The other piece too, I think is when it comes to opportunities, right? And so
Eleanor, you're frozen.
Uh-oh, can you find me?
Oh, there you go.
Right
Yeah,
okay.
you're back.
All right.
You're back.
All right,
You
I'm back.
froze for, okay.
Sorry for a second. So the other one that I would say is, right now, there's probably a few folks that are finding it challenging or difficult to think about changing careers or making the next step, or it might be a good time for that. But like, honestly, if you're in a place where you feel stuck, in a role where you're like, I need to stay here because it's more secure, like your why, it's okay to feel that way. But the way that I would look at it is, what if you think about what your future role is, 1 or 2 steps ahead, what can you do in your role today that can help to like train you, right? Like what can you do to, if you wanted to be a project manager and you're a recruiter, for example, what, start taking on those roles to hunt and search and network project managers, understand what their projects look like, ask them the questions about what makes them, how did they get into it. You start to interview them for the job, right, to connect them with the clients, but then you're also doing your own research. So what type of projects, what type of this, how did they get started? And then you start to, like, in your role, contribute to your current company, to start project planning events or things, right? Or role of technology that's helping, right? Take on those projects, own those pieces, and start to kind of build your portfolio from within the existing company. And you start to harness those experiences, because it's all about, it's regardless of the title, it's about your story. It's about the experience. It's about being able to say, like, I did this, I was passionate about this, I like this, I didn't like this, and knowing the differences. And you could do that regardless of goal, as long as you have a goal in mind. You can start to acquire those skills wherever you are.
Awesome.
So
That's great. So I know you and I have always been avid readers. I'm going to close with this last question before. So what is your favorite book?
Oh my goodness. I knew you were going to ask that. And I was like,
Of course, I'm going to ask that. I was going to lead with that, but I was going to close with it as well. So
I know. Oh my goodness. Like like there's always business books, right?
of course.
Which there, I mean, as simple as it sounds, like it's actually from Carl Smith. He gave me a book called like the No Asshole Rule, which I think is great for leading teams.
Yep.
But it's also like, the lean startup. I mean, honestly, like I go back to it to think about, business cases and understanding how things, how to shape. Also multipliers, I think is just, multipliers is great. But personally, like I love the Count of Monte Cristo and I love the Prophet. Like I just, and yeah. I mean, those are like, I mean, I have a library of things that I just like pick up along the way, but like those are easy go-to where I just need to like remember who I am. And then at the same time, like, oh, I need some business time and like remember where my focus is.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, even so Lean Canvas is also a great way to think about yourself and your goals and lay it out in like a one pager. When you think about yourself as a company and you think about yourself as a mission, like it lays out 7 of who, of your business, but at the same time, it's a great kind of summary of like what your purpose is, who are you connected to, what makes you different, how do you want to make money, right? Like what partnerships can you reach out to, who's your network, like all of those things, can be applied to you as yourself as a company.
That's an interesting concept because the lean canvas and Ash's whole mission is specifically to business, but you personalize that, right? So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Never really thought about it that way, but it's true. Yeah, it makes you question a lot of different stuff. Like, what is your unique value proposition? What is your problem and you're solving? That's interesting. That's cool.
Right. And like, how do you bring that to the table? I mean, I for the longest time, especially being in technology and as a woman, I thought like having energy, having passion, being this, were just soft skills that were extras. And also just came with being, like Filipinos aren't known to be assholes, right? Like we're pretty nice people that just want to get along and but are ambitious and hardworking and all of these things that I just thought like that's just who I am, that's how I come. But the difference is that those things are skills and abilities and they are marketable and they do make a difference between an interview and a pitch. They do make a difference in who you are and when you come to the table, like because especially someone that's interviewing 50 people for a specific position and you're all saying about the same thing, your passion and energy coming to the table like makes you different, especially if it's authentic, right? Like if you're not passionate and energetic, like don't like feign it, like don't fake it, but be your authentic self in those conversations and and it's a good thing. I mean, it's a very positive thing because it comes through.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna open it up. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. Nothing.
That's okay. You had all.
Did cover a lot. I didn't actually ask 73 questions, but I think I did ask a good amount of questions to you, Eleanor. So.
You did.
Hi, Eleanor. My name's Veronica. I'll go first.
Hi, Veronica.
Awesome.
Hopefully it'll open it up a little bit. So I feel like your journey is very similar to my journey, except I am way behind you. So I actually started at a healthcare tech company as an account manager. I found that I liked the technology piece of it because the account managers at the company were basically client facing, like you said, we had to deliver bad news with a smile on our face.
Right. And authority, right? Balanced with
Yes.
authority. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely had to learn the authority piece of it. But I found myself drifting to the technology side of things and wanted to understand, like you said, the why. Why is this happening? Why are these problems occurring? Kind of digging deeper. And I felt, I ended up switching from account management over to business analyst. And I think my goal, and I'm going to say I think, because I'm not really sure. I think down the line, I really want to move into a development role. But what are your thoughts? And I'm older already. I'm going to be 50 in a couple of years. I mean, how realistic is it to become a developer at the age of 50 for a woman?
I think it's totally realistic. I'm going to be very bold in saying that, especially now, because you bring a perspective. And here's why I say that: because you bring a perspective of both, having a client-facing role and being able to empathize and understand what they're looking for, and then develop it, right? So not only and the way that I would market you, and I think Pete will laugh at me when I say this, it's like, once you're a recruiter, you're always a recruiter. So when you're ready, Veronica, I will have like
I'm not right. I'm not laughing at you.
Yeah.
I agree.
Because the way that I would position your story, and maybe this would help you position yourself in your story that you tell yourself after this conversation, is because you're client facing, you understand the pains and problems, you understand where like things have failed. And then you're now in the role of BA, where you're trying to now like solve it in a different perspective, right? Say like, we don't want to miss these gaps because we know what the business requirements are and we want to develop to that, and you want to hand this over to the developer. Now you're completing the circle of life where you're saying, I understand what the client needs. I understand how to break down the requirements and also question the requirements. And now I get to develop it. And so that's where it's like, when you're ready and you get the skills, and I mean, there's code academies, obviously, General Assembly, things like that are available.
I'm working with the She Can Code It ladies. So they're awesome resources.
Yes. And that's being able to then develop your portfolio to then now it becomes, this is what makes me different than any other developer.
Okay. That's definitely very helpful.
And I would, and the way that you can develop your, you may not hold the developer title today, but you can adopt projects, right? So then you can show like what shows up on a lot of these ATS, like is basically like the way that you would position and package it is you can do all these side projects or specific projects, or you can shadow or apprentice within your organization already and just be like, look, I want to be in QA, or I want to develop this, or like help me understand this. And that kind of eases you in.
I think that will be probably my next step with my manager then, is just kind of letting them know, down the line, this is what I want to do. And any new projects that come up, just let me shadow, or let me just listen in on kind of the whole project management from step 1, step 2, and kind of see what developers, what they do.
Yes. And honestly, the next step that eases you into even the development is just like, who would be open to pair program with you, right?
Okay. Pair programming.
Sounds
good. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. That's
awesome,
exciting.
Veronica. So Eleanor, we did get another question from Jessica. She asked, have you ever asked someone to be your mentor? If so, how did you approach the process, especially in the case of approaching someone you did not already have a relationship with? Which is a great question. So
it is. And yes, I think, mentorship and the conversation, you always have a connection. So if there's someone that you see, you can always find, there's always I always say there's a connection. It's like that 3 degrees of separation, but now in this world, like we're all connected in a certain way. So if there's someone that stands out to you that has inspired you, or you're like, okay, I want to connect with that person, you've somehow found them, right? And so while you may not have a direct relationship with them, you can open it up for a conversation. And that's how I would say it, because to get asked or even to ask for a mentorship, it does hold a lot of responsibility, especially depending on, I mean, it's an honor, right? It's an honor for that mentor, but it's also, they may see it as a deep responsibility. So instead of approaching them so quickly to be a mentor, maybe just open it up to, hi, you know, I'm really curious about your journey, or I noticed you on this, et cetera, platform, or on stage, or I read your, or whatever that, how you found them initially, with that, why you're interested in them being your mentor, and then approach it with a, like a call to action to them, where it's just, can we have a conversation? Like, do you have a few minutes where, you know, where we can connect on XYZ, and have a couple of topics that you'd like to dig in deeper on? And that way it's not so ambiguous, but it also doesn't feel so heavy. And it's more of a, like, oh, okay, I know what this conversation looks like for the mentor. I hope that helps.
No, that's a really good point. You kind of flipping it a little bit, where the responsibility is, you know, not so heavy in the very beginning, right? You're just connecting with them, and then they slowly become a mentor, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you and I have very similar mentors, and I don't think I've ever reached out to them to say, would they be my mentor? But they just, it's kind of indirect, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And they're indirectly mentoring me.
Yes, it becomes more tangible and a little bit more, you know, and then maybe they grow into one of your 5, right?
Right.
Right. Thanks. That was
awesome. Great. So does anybody else have any other questions before we wrap up? I know we're kind of 2:16, so Eleanor, you probably do have a job to do. So, but hey, I really appreciate everybody's time as usual. Eleanor, great catching up with you. This is going to be recorded. We'll definitely get this out on our site as well as our YouTube channel here, probably within the next few days once we edit it. And then Eleanor, definitely when Code on the Beach comes back in 2021, definitely would love to have you down in Jacksonville. So thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it. And thank you again for everybody attending it. So I will see everybody next week.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
All right. See you soon.